Okay, we're still waiting for a few more. But welcome. I'm so glad for everybody that was able to join us today. My name is Amy Smigielski, and I am going to be welcoming all of us in today and starting this webinar, but really I'm going to let other great people on this call drive the important messaging that have lived and breathed some of these experiences and are going to share their sage advice and experience today. So I'm really excited for everybody that was able to join us. If we want to go ahead and click forward to the next slide. I want to be respectful of those of us that jumped in right at 1 o'clock. And I know for a lot of you, this is probably a lunch break or something along those times. So I want to honor that and tell you how we're going to do today. So we'll introduce the topic and talk about how we're going to function today and what we're going to get through. And then we're going to specifically turn to state leaders and let actual state leaders tell you their stories, what they've experienced, what they've learned, and I also want to be really clear that lessons learned doesn't just mean like, here's the bad things that happened and how to avoid it. A lot of the times, the lesson learned is like, this went great. So we want to look at both of those stories. So we're excited to have state leaders here to share their stories with you and then also so that you can ask questions of them. After that, we're going to kick it over to our friends at Opportunities Exchange. Mia and Adam are here, and they're going to give you kind of a Cliff Notes version of a guide to having a successful technology implementation, particularly with our landscape, what it is right now. We want to make sure that you guys have the information that you need for your technology implementations to, frankly speaking, not go over budget, not take longer than what you have time for. Those are really important things, especially in a world where we've seen projects have to go on pause because the money was withdrawn. It's very real right now, and I know that at least I feel that very deeply in my soul, like the anxiety of it. I imagine that many of you do as well, and we want to figure out what do you need to make sure you feel successful. All right, so that'll be how we'll walk through the day. We'll close with some additional time for questions and answers that you'll be welcome to type right into the chat. We want to respect everybody's privacy, so typing those into the chat, make sure that you don't randomly get spammed. And it gives everybody the space to ask their questions and feel comfortable with a little bit of discretion. Also, I want to let you know that at the end, if you have some additional questions you can think of later that are for anybody that's on this, we'll give you an email address that you can send those to. We can pass things along and filter it. So don't feel bound to just this moment in time to think of all your questions. We can go ahead and progress one more forward. All right, this is a shameless moment of mom woohoo. So this is actually my fourth day back from maternity leave, and there is my shameless view of my cute little baby that is actually sleeping in grandma's arms in the other room right now. So I felt like it was a good opportunity to force everyone to look at my little angel. So I'm just being real with you all. Um, but I already mentioned earlier that my name is Amy. I am at heart an early childhood practitioner like most of us on this call. So I started out teaching in third grade and got progressively younger until I found out that infants and toddlers were my heart really is, which is why it was so hard to leave my own little one to come back to work. But I also love the work that I get to do. And I have been on the state and the system side of many technology implementation, working with CCR&R systems, state systems, working within the early Head Start realm as well. Those have all been some of my different domains. And I have had a lot of good and a lot of bad implementations, experiences. And I want to share what I know with you, but more importantly, I want to give you a chance for to listen to others as well. So let's keep going and talk about what we do know for sure about the early childhood space. So, frankly speaking, anytime any of us go to do a big technology project, it is expensive, it's exhausting. It takes a lot of mental and physical energy, not in terms of like you're not doing the heavy lifting, but sometimes just the time and the energy that it takes is really hard. frankly speaking, as an early childhood system, it's harder for us than it is for a lot of other agencies, departments, etc. That's because our system is really complicated. So we have providers who are private businesses who may or may not have any comfortable touch of technology in their lives. We literally still have providers who are keeping track of things only in their own head or on post-it notes. And then we have other big system childcare providers who have, multi-layered technology systems. We've got to work with all of those. And then the integration just at a state level, licensing, quality rating, childcare subsidy, are all often different departments within states and run in different ways and sometimes on completely different systems. All of that can be really difficult. We know that the pool of money is limited. The pool of time is limited. State employees already have full-time jobs doing other stuff that is not a technology implementation. So it's hard to get the time to do this kind of work. And frankly, we all know that this is really high stakes work because at the end of the day, what we do is about children and families. We want to get it right. We want it to be sustainable. We want to make sure that we're setting our families up for success because ultimately, we also set up entire economies in the states to be successful. If families can't go to work, if their children aren't safe and thriving, the whole system falls apart. And we know that. So that's why it's important for us to really understand what sets everybody up for success in the best way possible. Go ahead and progress me forward, please. When it goes wrong, it's so it's heartbreaking and you end up in the headlines for reasons you never want to end up in the headlines for. So these are all headlines that we've seen, we've experienced. Um, One of the things that has happened to me more than I would have liked in the last year is getting calls from state agencies because they have headlines like this where something has gone wrong and they have no idea how to fix it. What they do know is that child cares are closing. They do know that families can't pay for their childcare and they're losing their jobs. They do know that children are in unsafe situations because we can't get things to move the way it needs to move. So, I love that it's okay to call and I can help with things like that, but to be really transparent, I also hate it when I get those calls because I don't want those situations to occur. I don't want to go in and help fix a technology's problem gone wrong. I want to make sure you guys are empowered so that doesn't happen, so that we don't see headlines like this. And that's what today is all about. How do we keep this from happening rather than how do we respond when it does happen? Let's keep going. So now we're going to transition and meet with some really brilliant people and share a little bit about the experience of all of these leaders. All right, so the first person we're going to talk to today is Courtney Penn, and you can keep heading us on through. All right, so full transparency, Courtney and I go back a lot of years, one of my very favorite people. And so we had the pleasure of working together a few different times within the state of Indiana. Courtney has just recently transitioned hats from being the director of the Office of Early Childhood and Out of School Learning to now being the CEO of Meet the Needs. So we are so excited to have you here today, Courtney, and to tell a little bit about your experience. So, are you all right if I go ahead and jump in and start asking you a few questions?
Sure. Yeah, let's go for it.
All right. So, why don't you just start by sharing with everybody a little bit about your background with leading technology projects?
Sure. And I feel like every time I go to say how long I've been in the early care and education world, I just feel like a dinosaur walking
I
around.
strategically didn't say that for you in case you were like, no, let's omit that information.
Well, I always jokingly say that I count the formative first 5 years as well of like my own first five in those 25 years. But no, all jokes aside, I have had a vast amount of experience from local, state, national CCR&R support of different projects, also working for the state as a vendor of the state, navigating through, which I'm going to take some of us back in a time machine. If you're familiar with one of our very first LMS management systems, which was Training Central, back in the 2012, 2013, around that time frame, and really getting my feet wet with leveraging like Adobe Connect. Like back then, before the pre-pandemic, when people weren't so familiar with using technology, it was very innovative to really even be thinking that way, to draw in childcare providers and partners into learning and growing through a computer versus being in a setting together, right? And so not only navigating the system transitions, but also the humans, right? And the human-centered design that goes along with that process. And so then, as Amy mentioned, we work together at a statewide CCR&R entity. And within that, I was able to help support what we now leverage as iLead, our system, where again, now we tagged on not only the learning management system, but also applying for applications and renewing applications for childcare providers in that system. And then, as she mentioned, my previous role as being the state administrator for the state of Indiana, the CCDF state administrator, the director of the Office of Early Childhood and Out of School Learning, where we saw a lot of fundamental components, where it was updating the system that the licensing consultants use to do their regulatory work, whether it was updating systems for and bringing in new ideas and concepts as far as childcare management systems, CCMS, those shared services models, and writing those RFPs, putting that work out to bid. And then also a very huge project, which is IN Kids, that has been going on for quite some time. The RFP process, I think that vendor was awarded that in around 2021, and that project is ongoing. And being able to first be as the licensing director, as a subject matter expert at the table, helping lead that work in sprint meetings and me being very innovative there, but then being promoted to the director of the Office of Early Childhood and Out of School Learning, and overseeing that office and that work and that project from that point of view as well. And so I'd also be remiss if I didn't say that I had a great team of folks helping lead those charges as well. But I will just say that through all those different capacities, I've been able to see these different projects from different focal points just based on my seat at the table.
And I think that's one of the reasons it makes it so helpful to be able to have you here today, is because you have had a variety of seats at the table. You've been the vendor delivering on things, and then you've also been the state administrator overseeing that work. And I think all of those perspectives lends to your like authentic expertise. So tell me, have you ever had a project that you just really felt like it was going off the rails?
No, never. I have always said I couldn't even get it out with a straight face.
No, because we've sat together while it was going off the rails.
Yes. The best laid plans, right? And yes, I 100% can say that. And to your point earlier, I think it's very critical for people to realize, just like other things that happen in life, that that's part of life and living, right? And what you do when you learn when things go off the rails or things happen that you didn't expect to happen, or some unexpected consequence happens, the good, the bad, and indifferent. One of the ones that I think about is the CCMS work that we did, the child care management system work that we did in the state of Indiana. A good, this isn't necessarily off the rails, but some unexpected thing that happened was that those vendors who weren't even awarded the RFP for that project, those who already had customers here in the state of Indiana, who didn't want to lose those customers to those three vendors that won, met that same state price that we were able to get with those, that we negotiated with those three vendors. And childcare providers, even if they already had a current CCMS system, were able to still be able to benefit from that project, but even though they stayed with a vendor that they had that wasn't part of that. And so that was an unexpected surprise, but a pleasant surprise, but also one of those things that never really thought about, never really was on our radar when we were just solely focused on, okay, we've picked our vendors. This is what we're doing. This is how we built a great website. Built a great FAQs and tools, and we had all our call centers ready to answer questions. But then that happened, and it was like, oh, well, that's really cool, but something we didn't really think about. But then also thinking about where there are opportunities to grow and learn from those things that happen. And I will jokingly say that, as the great philosopher Ross Geller once said, be ready to pivot anytime a project does go off the rails, and shift and move in a way that is impactful for the work overall. Remembering that it's not a personal thing, it's not a you thing, but it's a, what do we want the desired outcome to be?
Mhm. Oh, I love that point. It's not personal. It's not personal to the vendor. It's not personal to the childcare provider or a family who's upset. Like we've just got to pivot with the reality of where we are. I think that's a really lovely way to say that. Because frankly, when you're leading in the middle of it, it feels personal. It feels like,
Yeah, what did I
oh,
do wrong? Yeah.
yes, like your internal monologue is I suck, right? I
Yes.
don't know if I can say that in a webinar. Let's all just agree that that's allowed in webinars. But it's real. That's how we actually feel.
Yes.
So, um, what do you think if you were just going to recommend to people how to make projects more successful? What are some of those pieces that you would tell people they really need to be thinking about?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So ultimately, it is a few things, which, one, what is the ultimate thing that you're trying, what's the problem you're trying to solve, right? At the end of the day, I think that has to be your focal point, because if you're not solving a problem, and if this technology won't bring a solution, it will bring more problems. Maybe the timing isn't right, or maybe it is a time to shift and move and do something differently and focus on something else, whether it's enhancing your current system or developing a brand new system. And those were some discovery things that had to happen, even in the development of I kids and other large projects where the state has to consider, or any entity has to consider, what's the return on investment of funding a big massive technology enhancement or change, right, to a brand new system. And really thinking about what's the problem you're trying to solve for, and what's the end user experience going to be like, and being very cognizant of that. And I also think it's very important, one of the things that we found ourselves in, again, sitting as a subject matter expert and then also sitting in the seat of leading the work, was not being afraid of hurting people's feelings. And I think that's a huge thing in this human services field that may not be a thing in other and other sectors, if you will, because we are at the table because we care and because we want to do great things and support one another and make life great for other people. But it's so hard to figure out there's a careful balance of, when you're at the table making those decisions, to ensure that you are not going to make the project go stale, or extend the length of the timeline allotted, which also include extending the funding for the allotted project based on all the back and forth conversations. We had many an opportunity where there'd be back and forth where, well, if the licensing team makes this change, this is how this will affect the quality team, and then so forth. Both of those changes will then subsequently affect the subsidy team and the work that they're doing. And so really being thoughtful around the fact that everybody's not going to be able to get all their hopes and dreams out of a system. Everybody, especially folks who've been around the system for a while, especially me having been a provider many,
Mhm.
many, many moons ago, also thinking about, oh, if I was a provider, what would I want? If I were this, what would I want? And those are great aspects and great points of view to have, but you can't let those bog you down in the day-to-day build of that system, or you'll just continue to keep spinning your wheels. And so
Mhm.
I encourage everybody to really think about what they really want out of the system, write that down, make it very plain, and try to make some of those agreements before you bring in expensive vendors to the
Mhm.
table, so that you're not having those conversations and using time that's really supposed to be made for curating the system to really make those agreements among yourselves as a team.
I think that's an incredibly important point. You have to have that clear vision of what you're trying to achieve, and then you've got to have all the players aligned. And
Yes.
you want to do that before you have um the time of, okay, now we want to get your thing built, whatever the cool shiny thing is, right? You
Right.
want to make sure that you've got a clear vision of what you want it to achieve
That's right.
before that. Do you feel like that vision, though, what role do you want to let a vendor play? The actual technology vendor, the person who's going to come in and build your cool shiny thing.
Yeah.
What role do they play once you have that vision?
Yeah, that's a really great point. So, ult- in my humble opinion, I think the answer to that question is really helping drive the places and the subject matter expertise that you all as a team do not possess.
Mhm.
For example, um, one of the things that also came to mind is leveraging our peers. We, as a state, had peer to peer opportunities where we work with other states who were also doing the same lift to find out what conversations that they would and what vendors they were working with and how those conversations and negotiations were happening. Because I'm also a firm believer in not reinventing the wheel. And if somebody's figured it out, it's going to be great and leverage that process. And so, in turn, really being able to let the vendor do that work as well. If you're paying somebody to come to the table from to be that subject matter expertise, let them let you know this is what the system can do. Like, it's great that you want to do that, but this is how much it's going to cost. And I think that's that's a huge point of contention as well, to that the vendor not let folks just keep dreaming and not know that, well, if you want to make this change or this enhancement, it's going to cost you X amount of dollars. I feel that there has to be some agreement of some transparency there to be able to not have the sticker price just continue to, like, I thought I was getting a base model Chevy and now you're selling me a Cadillac at the end because we just kept adding things thinking this was
Sometimes they're
already
selling you a rocket ship, Courtney. Like you think.
yeah. Can you tell I'm a GM girl? But anyway, then that one, I'm not even getting sponsored for that shameless plug. But I think ultimately is let the right experts be the right experts, right? And let them be very clear in how long it's going to cost, how long it's going to cost, how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost, and what things need to be a go live thing, and what things can wait and possibly be enhancement down the road.
That's huge. And I want to make sure we've got time to talk to everybody else today, but I think I want to just like underscore how big of a deal that is to keep in mind that there's everybody's coming to the table with expertise and not forgetting the expertise that you all as the early childhood professionals are
Yes.
bringing to the table as the state leaders, the state decision makers. And you need to make sure that you've got a vendor who's going to partner with you with that transparency Courtney is describing, right? You're saying you want to know how long is it going to take and how much more is it going to cost? But you also
Yes.
need the vendor to be willing to, um, honestly, I'm gonna like use my own words for this, but honestly, you want a vendor who sometimes is going to tell you, no, that's a stupid idea, right? Like you don't
Yeah.
actually need to have the 18 tires on your Chevy.
Right.
You really just need four.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes.
So I love all of that. If okay, so we have time for everybody else to go ahead and share some of their ideas. If you could think about just one thing that you would tell somebody to focus on and get really right before they set their RFP out for a new project, what do you think that one thing would be?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that. What problem are you trying to solve? Get the right key players at the table in the beginning, what on your team in the beginning, and really be clear of what you're trying to solve and work your way backwards. From a timeline perspective, be really clear on the timelines you want to set for the work. Because again, as you mentioned, you're leveraging subject matter experts on the team, but that also means that those people who have, real day-to-day jobs as well, besides just building this team, are going to be pulled in multiple directions. So being very clear, whether it's a calendar, whether it's a Teams messaging or project management, having a project manager or some lead that's going to help beat the drum that everybody's beating. I always say, one band, one sound. Somebody at the table who can lead that charge, who's not afraid of having difficult conversations when it comes to, hey, we need to keep moving for the sake of the health of this project. And so that would be my key input for that.
And I think that's always why you've been one of my favorite people to get to work with because you are authentically one of the most compassionate people I know, but you're also not afraid to lean in and have that conversation. Be like, Okay. Stop.
Time's up.
We're
Yeah.
not gonna we're not gonna keep doing this in this wrong direction here. But you said this earlier, and I think it's really true. Sometimes as caregivers, which is what we tend to be in this field, we're too nice and we're too worried about hurting somebody's feelings. And you got to lean in and remember you're doing this for the children, the families, the
That's
child.
right.
And and I say this as someone who works for a technology vendor now. It's okay to be mean to us, right? Like, to remind us of who we're doing this for and what we need to do it right for. Like, be mean. That is the lesson of this webinar. All right. Thank you so very much, Courtney. Please, if you guys have questions that you feel like Courtney can help you answer, don't hesitate to put those in the chat. And then we'll also give you an email that you can direct more questions to at the very end as well. So thank you so very much. And I hope we get to do this again because it's been a lot of fun to work with you on this.
Thank you, Amy. I
All
agree.
right, we're going to keep moving forward, and I'm actually going to hand the baton over to one of my colleagues here at Resultant, Jenna, and she's going to give the wonderful welcome to Elizabeth as well. So, Jenna, I'll go ahead and toss it to you.
Thanks, Amy. I am really excited to introduce Elizabeth Hayes to the group. She is the Assistant Director at the Division of Child Development and Early Education in North Carolina. And she has oversight for the Subsidized Child Care Assistance Program in North Carolina. And she's here to talk to us about the online case management system, which is called NC FAST. Which stands for North Carolina Families Accessing Services Through Technology. So, Elizabeth, are you here with us?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon.
I was hoping you could tell us about the successful implementation of NCFAST in North Carolina.
Sure, absolutely. And I do have a couple of slides just to kind of get us grounded in what is NCFAS because it's a very large system. But as Jenna said, it is an online case management system that is used across the Department of Health and Human Services in North Carolina. So subsidized childcare is one of the economic programs that's in the system, but it also houses basically all of our economic programs that come through DHHS. So you think Medicaid, you think FNS, energy programs, runs the gamut, that all of those programs are in the system. And if you could switch to the slide that has, that's just kind of an introduction, got my email address on there, and then we can roll on to the next one. All right, so this is just some key pieces to take away. So again, on the left side, we kind of have some characteristics of the entire system. So it is statewide. Again, it encompasses multiple economic programs, does do the case management for us. A big piece of NCFAST is the transparency that it provides, both at state level, county level, and for subsidized childcare for providers as well. It also gives us a system where we can have electronic records versus paper records. It was the whole entire goal of NCFAST. One of the main goals was to replace a very outdated legacy system, thinking those black screens with the green box like block lettering. So that's what we were working with before, and then improved data. And then specifically for subsidized childcare, it's almost like there's kind of three pieces to the module for subsidized childcare and NC So we have the case management piece, and that's where the local workers are entering the information about the families who are applying, they're authorizing services, all of that. And then we also have our provider management, which actually does include a provider portal. So our childcare providers who are enrolled in the subsidy program can actually go log in to their portal. They see all the children that they have vouchers for. They're able to accept rosters. They enter their attendance electronically. So we were able to get rid of the paper attendance records. And then there's also the third piece, the fund management. So of course, that's very important. We know there's multiple streaming funds that come through the program. And so the system has been designed and built to know the characteristics of the different funding sources, so it knows what cases, what funds can be pulled for different case characteristics and things like that. So that's just kind of a real quick, 2-minute overview of NC Fast.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Can you tell us, you kind of talked about what problem the technology was trying to solve, right? This sort of legacy system, outdated, and then this all the paper. What do you think made NC Fast and the implementation of NC Fast? What do you think made it successful?
One of the biggest things that helped us really make it successful was, and it, I will say this, I will preface it by saying it was not always the case. But as you can imagine, it's been quite a journey to get there. And also just for, the sake of this conversation, North Carolina has been using this system for subsidized childcare since 2017. So we've got quite a few years in the system now. I've been fortunate enough to be the business owner since 2018. So I have seen it as a project rolling right into our operations and maintenance. But I would say one of the key pieces that really helps make it successful is for the policy to drive the technology. When the technology drives the policy, you end up with very interesting things sometimes. We end up many times being with functionality that's not quite in compliance with policies and rules and things like that. So it's I think, very important to keep policy in the forefront. Always. And then, you work with, at least in North Carolina, we work with our developers to say, okay, this is the policy and this is the way we need it to be. Now let's talk about the restrictions that we have, or, like Courtney was saying, how much is it going to cost and how long is it going to take to get to whatever this new change is. And I would say another aspect that makes it very successful, I think, is also having an agile approach. And if for those maybe not very familiar with agile approach, I'm definitely not the most knowledgeable, but that is basically an approach that really, I think, keeps transparency at its heart, so that it's not just the old school way or the waterfall approach where you get together with the technical team, your vendor or whoever, and you say, okay, this is what we need, here are our requirements. Then that technical team goes back and they do a lot of work, and then they come with a product to present, and can see numerous issues at that point. Whereas in Agile, you go little bit by little bit. So you make sure that the program folks are communicating very clearly what's needed to the technical team, to that vendor, and then they're able to display periodically the progress that they're making. And when I say display, I mean like getting right down to demos. Let's see some screens, even if it's just 1 or 2 screens that have been worked on in, the past week, 2 weeks, whatever the cadence of meetings is, being able to actually see things as they're being developed. That makes such a huge difference. I have approached projects or aspects of projects in both ways. And I can tell you that the Agile, I mean, I wouldn't give it up for anything, just because you can catch the smallest little things very quickly. And, especially, I always say there's like this bridge you have to, or a gap you have to bridge between the technology language and the program language. And sometimes when you're just using words to do that, it can be really hard for everyone to understand. So getting those visuals in there, those demos, screen mock-ups, whatever the case may be, workflows, those types of things are really in that agile portfolio, if you will, and really go a long way.
That's great. Thank you. Do you have kind of along the same lines, you talked about some of the successes that you had. Did you have any growing pains or lessons learned through the implementation of NC Fast?
Yes, absolutely. Some growing pains. Getting providers to accept technology sometimes is a huge growing pain that we definitely had. Continue to deal with it some now. One way that we did, and one thing that we have learned along the way is obviously training providers, or anyone that's going to be using the system in any capacity, getting that training in as early as possible. Another thing that I have found is just being very open and transparent with the provider community and asking for their input. That's a great way to get really good buy-in, is to let them have a seat at the table. And that can be really challenging. We in North Carolina, we went at that in a few different directions. I will say with the entire case management system, looking back, of course, we can always do the Monday morning quarterback kind of thing and say how it should have been, but definitely I saw with the implementation of NC Fast to begin with, we didn't get enough of that provider input, so it was hard to get buy-in sometimes, and so lessons learned. We fast forward a few years. We actually revamped the provider portal side of NC Fast, which is the part where providers log in and do their thing with attendance and rosters and vouchers. And what we did when we decided to take on that project of a revamp, we said we've got to get more providers to the table. We started with a very detailed survey where we actually did like screenshots of what the screens look like in the portal to say, hey, what works about this part of the system and what doesn't? Tell us all the good, all the bad. But we got very, very specific. We also used our business team, very skilled business team, to do some one-on-one interviews with providers. So we made sure we had a good balance, because we're building a system. We were trying to build a system that needs to meet the needs of a family child care home that's only providing care for 8 children, right up to a large center that might be caring for 200 plus children. So how do you find that sweet spot that makes it work for everyone? And so being able to get that input from the providers and their real life experience with what it is, what it feels like on their end, has been what I feel like was very, very pivotal for us. Another thing, just because it is challenging to get providers on with the technology, making sure that whatever the solution is, there's a web-based version for it as well. We have found that is huge. We have so many providers in North Carolina, and I can't imagine that this state's unique in this manner, in that so many people are working off of their smartphone, right there in the palm of their hand. So making sure that whatever the solution is, that it's as mobile friendly as is possible, has been huge for us as well.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for sharing all of this. I want to wrap up by just asking you sort of what are some of the best practices for maintaining and iterating this NC Fast and keeping it going and keeping it working?
Yes, absolutely. That is a great question. And I will say that North Carolina is very fortunate in the way our system is kind of set up, as far as it NC Fast is actually a part of a division within the Department of Health and Human Services. So it started with a vendor, but it all along, we always had kind of a combination of state employees and contract vendor employees, who work very closely together. And what that allowed us to have at the end, when the project ended, was we had a huge team already there that was going to stay with the state, with the system, to keep working on it. And so you had, for instance, my lead developer, I met him on my first day when I started with DCDEE, and he continues to be the lead developer. He was in a contract position. He chose to come over to state role. And so, being able to have that consistency amongst the team even if it's not your people, that the actual people as resources that stay, making sure you have those lessons learned, that knowledge transfer that needs to happen in a timely manner, so that when that next change comes, or that first, those defects stop popping up, or whatever it is that may happen, you've got your technical team with that history and that knowledge, rather than then having to basically almost start over with a new team. So that's been very, I think that's a great way to handle iterations. And I repeat the question, Jen. I felt like I went down a rabbit hole there and might have gotten lost a little bit.
Oh no, you answered it. It was just kind of how you're able to maintain and keep
Yes.
it
Okay.
going and keep it successful. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much
Absolutely.
for everything. This has been really helpful. I know just learning from other states and what's worked and what you've done to be successful can be really helpful. So I'm going to hand it back over to Amy now for the next portion of our webinar.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elizabeth. And we've already had a few people that are dropping those questions in the chat. We will make sure that whoever needs to respond, you get your answers. So please just keep them coming. If we don't answer them live today, we'll send you out messages separately to make sure you get your questions answered. All right, so now we're going to move from hearing from our state leaders and what's been successful for them and how they put together some of these really complicated systems, to talking to Mia and Adam over at Opportunities Exchange with a little bit of information about how we can prevent things from going awry and what some of those best practices are. So I will go ahead and toss it to you guys.
Thank you so much, Amy. We're happy to be here today. And I'm going to go through a little bit of information and then Adam will. So could we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. I think what you'll see that we're presenting is very aligned with what Courtney and Elizabeth shared as their experiential learning. At OpX, we learn alongside our partners and have really come to some of the same best practices that they offered. One is aligning on vision, defining outcomes, and then setting up contracts to be successful. All of this is like pre-work before you actually get started on building the technology. So Courtney spoke about this very well. What's the vision? Where are you coming from and where are you trying to go? What's the current state of your project or your systems? And really, I think, something that will affect licensing, that will then trickle and affect QRIS, that will then affect subsidy, and then overarching, like how will that affect providers? Are you introducing something that solves a problem for them, or does it solve a problem for your team? And will it end up creating another problem for providers? And so, identifying the vision, and then like Elizabeth was saying, working with providers and making sure they have a voice at the table is really critical to developing that North Star that everyone can point to all along the way. When we talk about defining outcomes, we've seen a lot where we often expect technology to work like a light switch, where we get the licenses for the CCMS system, for example, for providers, and we expect it to be like a switch. Okay, it's on. But really, the outcome isn't necessarily the best outcome, I would say, that we make available a certain number of something. It's usually a little bit deeper what we're looking for. How do we get people to use the system? How do we know if they're using it well? What metrics and criteria are we setting for participation and expectations? And how does that align with the vision? And how does that align with everyone's desired outcomes? So if you want providers to use CCMS to submit subsidy information for your state, for example, the outcome isn't just that they use a CCMS system, it's that they use the subsidy functionality. So most likely that has to do with managing enrollment and attendance tracking within the system. So you have to think, pretty concretely about what you're trying to get at. And then Adam will talk a bit more about this as well, but thinking through the support needed to get that engagement is another really critical piece of a successful implementation, whether that's with childcare providers or business coaches or internal state teams or partners or stakeholders. You're probably going to need to front load more support than you're expecting to reach that high level of engagement that will indicate a successful project. And then when you're building contracts, you want all those milestones, you want your funding streams, you want participation, clarity, and customer support basically to all be aligned within the contract before you even get started on the work. So if the goal is that a certain level of engagement is how you'll know you're successful, who is responsible for that? A vendor building a system might be able to build into the contract some customer support or training or onboarding efforts, but they won't likely be able to do that as an aside, like as a, oh yeah, sure, we can do that because we're so nice after the contract has already been issued, because there is a very real cost that comes with that level of depth. And I would encourage you to think in advance about how worth it is to get that support lined up. Way better to get the, people dialed in and using the tools than, sort of cast out the access and then find out that, people aren't using it because they don't know how or weren't aware, et cetera. So a lot of forethought goes into all of this to help set up a project that will be successful long-term. Next slide, please. Thank you. So it's not, so a big chunk of this is changing behavior. I alluded to that in the last few things I said, but it's also getting buy-in. So that can be a very often overlooked piece of contracting and planning in general. So if your goal has been established and you have the project North Star and you're maintaining the sort of line of sight to it, how are you going to move people? Who needs to change processes? Is it internal teams? Is it stakeholders? Is it end users? Is it families? Who will do that training? That's a very real question to answer. And again, a lot of times a vendor can add that in as a service and a support, but it's a really hard ask for them to do it if the contract is just built on development costs. And so this is how we can identify some of those costs up front. And you might see a higher, initial cost because it's going to help support process adoption and ongoing or, initial or ongoing training. But then those needs will drop off as the users get more comfortable and fluent in their experience. And so in addition to who trains to the new process, who's responsible ongoing for that support mechanism? Is it something the state does through TA? Is it something the vendor does through a support contract or a support piece? Those are really good pieces to think through with your vendor partners. Next slide, please. Okay, so when we're thinking about your role as a client, I think Courtney talked about this really well. Also, like we don't want to hurt people's feelings, but sometimes we also don't want to be the decision maker. And to successfully initiate a project, a technology project in particular, where the end user, like Elizabeth said, might be slow to adopt technology, you have to have a decision maker who is helping the team show up on the ground, whether that is your team or an associate team or coaches or people working with providers, et cetera. And aligning policy, like Elizabeth said as well, to the procedure is super important. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to build a technology tool to continue to do something twice, for example. And if it's in the policy to do the thing twice, maybe it's a signature requirement just to make it more concrete. Can you adjust the policy as you're building the automation so that everything gets easier in the long run? If you're introducing a new system to meet better data visibility and reporting requirements, is there a way to link it to tools that are already being used by childcare providers rather than introducing an entirely new system to them? And this goes again to how are you including the users of your tools and process? Having those conversations in advance with people, with providers in particular, if you're working on tools for them, can be so critically important to helping your team, the development team, and the providers themselves understand the vision and what you're all working towards. And so, if you think of it as a line of sight, someone needs to own that and communicate ongoing with the vendor who is your partner. And I can guarantee you, if you're experiencing some type of issue, your vendor wants it to not be an issue. They want to work with you to make the concern or the functionality better and stronger. And so you absolutely should feel comfortable going to them and having those conversations and figuring things out. And I really liked the seeing development as it's being written into code, as seeing little bits and pieces versus like someone goes away and builds everything and then comes back to you with what they built, because you can adjust things as they come. And on that note, I'm going to pass it to Adam to talk a little more about these pieces.
Thanks, Mia. Next slide. I'm going to go a little quick here, leave us some time for Q&A, but I just want to point out, other than the change management piece of the moving of providers is typically challenging, the further away people are from that center group, the more you have to communicate with them, the more you have to get them on board. But the biggest misconception I see in projects and why they typically go sideways quickly early is because most people assume they're getting group one as their vendor here. They're assuming they're getting a partner, a thought partner, someone that's going to sit and collaborate and tell them which way to go, give them options, pros and cons. And that's not always the case. You could also be kind of in the room with a task-focused group, which is tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it, right? I think of a house building analogy. If you know exactly what the house is, you have the blueprints, you can probably get away with a task-focused group coming in and saying, I want the foundation here, I want the walls there, et cetera, et cetera. But if you have no idea what you're building, which is typically where we're starting to push this technology boundary into unknown space, you're really going to want to lean towards that consultation group, right? And those questions that they'll ask will kind of cue you in on what type of group that is. If they're bringing their own business analyst, if they're bringing their own ECE experience in the room, you're going to get more of that partner. So it's just important to understand which group you have here and what your role is with each. And your role is going to be a lot heavier on the task side. You're going to need your own internal IT teams, your own business analysts, your own policy. You're going to need to bring everybody in the room because you're going to have to build that product, which is very, very challenging as a technology person to build a product. So let's go to the next slide, please. All right, cool. This is all great, but what happens if we're already off the rails? How do we get back on? The biggest piece is just identifying the gaps. Elizabeth spoke really, I like what she talked about, the agile workflow and how they're basically iterative process. It's basically like, if I'm drawing something and I show it to you, how's this? And you say, no, change that. And I go back and I draw it and I say, here's how's this, right? The trap with that is if a vendor's developing that, not designing it, if they're developing it, if they're writing code and they're showing you a form and they're saying no, oh, you're off the rails, right? That needs to be designed, that needs to be shown to you in a design, and then you need to say, yes, that's what I want. You need to show it internally, say, yes, that's what I want, because the design process is much quicker and it's much more visible for people to be able to see and interact with. And some of these design systems, you can even click through them. So highly, that is a big focal point with me when you're iterating over this, when you're identifying those gaps. Well, we went long, this sprint took too long. Why? Right? And if you fix the why, the core reason why, well, it went long. Why? Our development life cycle with the vendor partner takes a month. We expected it to take 2 weeks. Okay, you either have to change your timelines or you have to tighten that cycle, right? You kind of have to get under the hood a little bit to understand this in much more detail. And the reason this whole thing, I think, kind of came up, Amy and Peter and me and I were in a room and we were talking about it just physically hurts are, my heart when I hear these stories about, oh, we had to spend all this money and we didn't even get something that worked. And so, when you're stuck, when you're hurting, when you're internally struggling, it doesn't, you can call us, you can call, I know Resultant's open to that conversation. It's a quick conversation that maybe we can right the ship or make some quick recommendations, give you a little bit of a sanity check, maybe. And there doesn't have to be this huge contractual obligation piece. It's just something that we can hopefully help provide a little insight on. So I'm going to end it there just to open it up to questions. I can definitely talk for the last 4 minutes, but I'll pause here and see if anybody has any questions. And so the one thing I do want to bring back into the other big myth that I hear when I'm talking with states is understanding that provider journey when you start and understanding that provider journey of where you want them to head. And what happens is not oftentimes a provider is included. So I'm so glad Elizabeth said include your providers, talk to your providers, get all the different provider types you could possibly have, understand all the ways they might submit subsidy information, understand that they're busy and they might go back 3 months and back bill. If your policy allows for it, your tech has to allow for it, your process has to allow for it. So understanding that provider journey, taking that provider journey, I would love it if every project that impacted a provider, everyone got in a room and said, all right, we're starting a provider. We're going to fill out a licensing form. We're going to, apply to accept subsidy. We're going to do all the pieces that we need to do in order for this project to be successful. So you really feel it. You really understand what the journey is that they're taking. So both understanding the journey, you could do that yourself, and including a provider group, including coaches, including trainers, including R&Rs, anybody that's involved in that whole, it's a huge pylon that you're trying to slide. And so including everyone along that path is massively important. And that people piece is the one that really can go off. So Amy, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you so very much to all of our team that has helped us put this together today. If you want to go ahead and progress us, let's go past this as well. Just because we're at the end of time, we'll go ahead and wrap up. One more slide. All right. Lots of good information was shared today. We'll go ahead and send out an email summary and a link so that if you want to share this or want to go back and listen to something again, you can. At the end of the day, all of us want to make sure that everybody that can possibly be set up for success is set up for success. That first step is in grounding yourself in that vision, understanding who is a stakeholder in this, what do we need for them to be able to do, and then partnering in the right way with a vendor so that you can refine that vision. And you've got to write it down. You've got to write down where you're going. You've got to make that a foundational document that you go back to and reference. And if your vendors are not writing it down with you and caring about it with you, that's a moment to have some pause and figure out how you can ensure that they're listening and tied into this with you. I love what me and Adam shared though about like what kind of vendor do you have? Do you have somebody that is going to just assemble the house and all you're going to do is pick out the color of the wallpaper and the floors? Or are you going with somebody that's going to help you craft a vision from the beginning? You just need to understand what you have. Different situations call for different things, and that's okay. But get that vision, get that plan put together. Align on the outcomes. What do you need the end result to measure and to show you? And then measure and then managing all the way through it. Like going back to what Courtney and I talked about, that sometimes you've got to be a little straightforward, we'll call it, instead of mean. You've got to ask questions, you got to push, and you've got to stay aligned with that vision. Go ahead and click us through one more as we close out right at 2 o'clock. If you are struggling or you're getting ready to start, you don't know where to start and want to connect with anybody who talked today, feel free to email me. That's my email, and I will also type it into the chat so that you can just copy and paste. But please reach out to us so that we can make sure that you get set up right. Even if that just means you need somebody to talk to you for an hour before you get ready and lay something all out, or you just want to gut check with somebody. That's sometimes really helpful. So thank you for joining us today, and I hope that we have given you some nuggets that can help you move forward with your journey. Take care, all.